Welcome to COVID and Climate Change Correlations, a weekly video podcast where I, Daniel Sanderson, engage in a stimulating conversation with post-Keynesian economist Steve Keen. Okay, well, welcome, Steve, and everybody, all our growing fan base. We're into another episode of COVID and climate correlations, and we've got the star of the show, Steve Keen, back in virtual studio again. How are you doing this evening, Steve, or this morning?
My wife has changed her waking pattern, so she's now waking at 5:30 and wanting to go for a walk first thing in the morning. So I was pretty drowsy for a while there, but I had actually a morning snooze after the morning walk, and I think I'm feeling reasonably compass-menty.
Oh, good. But remember the last time she did this on us, we had to change our time. Was that?
She's completely, I don't know, I'm waiting for her to do a complete 25-hour rotation. She just, she's gone from going to bed at 6 a.m. to waking up at 5.
Oh. Okay.
Anyway, God knows where the pattern will end. But lockdown does crazy things. When you're married to a crazy person, it makes it crazy squared. Which is
it's crazy love. So
it's more comfortable than boring. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I wanted to, I don't know if you got my note, but I know this was a bit of a last minute thing. I was trying to see if I could get Tim Morgan on the show, and he's put forward an economic model called Seeds, and it's I'll send you the link to his blog here.
Okay.
But basically, the foundation of his economic model is one that's based on resources as opposed to monetary, or in terms of finance. It's more of a resource-based energy economics.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And I think, in some respects, from an economic standpoint, I'm definitely a layman coming into this, and I'd make a couple of assumptions to say how would, your thoughts in economics converge with his, and I see a convergence happening on the issues of climate change, but where I think it's very uniquely different is that he's modeling. The foundation of his models are all based off of energy. And he's just much more upfront with that particular thing.
Well, fundamentally, I've got the same foundation, just that, one of the problems with trying to do decent economics is mainstream economics is so dominant, so wrong, but so intricate that there are numerous angles you can attack it from. And as it happens, the one that I chose first was the money angle. But when I've always argued, my foundation of economics has to be that the source of all surplus is energy. In other words, what we call surplus on the planet is us transforming the energy we find in the universe that existed long before we did, transforming that into useful work. And if you didn't do that, you wouldn't have an economy to begin with. So in that sense, I completely accept his foundation. I just haven't had a look. I haven't actually seen it before, so I'll need to take a look and see what it's like.
Yeah, I did reach out to him as well, and you'll find, I think, that the climate circles, and that's what I hope to bring to the show as well with some guests. Is to reach out to some people that are in the climate circles that have some of these voices, regardless really of impact, whether or not they're a huge superstar in the circle in terms of viewers or followers. It's not my main metric.
Yeah.
It's the fact that I think there's some some reoccurring voices that have something to say, and I think from a contrarian standpoint, I think there's probably some sympathy there.
I'm sure there is. I'm just actually trying to find where his model is. I'm saying his surplus energy economic data system, I'm wondering. I don't know the extent which is actually based on a mathematical model or econometric style work. From what I can see, he's taking in data up to 2017 and then extrapolating forward. I'd just like to know how the extrapolations are done.
Oh, interesting. Okay, well, let's hope that we do get him on the show. I saw that. I think he has, his fundamental principles, which he's trying to summarize. First being that the economy is energy, and then there's a cost of surplus, which is basically there's a cost to extract the energy to make it usable, and then there's the finance part of it, I guess, which is maybe how we mediate the use of it. I mean, I don't think we can completely eliminate the use of currency. But anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on it because I'm actually hoping that we could actually get him on the show. And I'm sure it's always best to hear it from him. And so, okay. IPCC.
Yes. The first of the IPCC is broken into three sections, and this is the only one that's worth paying, not the only one worth paying attention to, but the one worth paying attention to, because what the scientists are saying are the tendencies that they are seeing in the biophysical systems that they're qualified to analyze, and it's all about the damage that'll be done to the habitability of the planet by getting beyond 1.5 or 2 degrees of a rise, and what we're not getting into the stage of the feasibility of reducing it. But that's their line in the sand, and of course, not the line in the sand. The optimum that economists have said we should get to is 4 degrees. So that's the real. I think what people have in mind. How can it be optimal be on the other side of the line in the sand that the scientists draw about the impact of climate change on the habitability of the planet?
Yeah, well, we're going to leave that to your the submittal of your report to demolish that 4 degrees, because we know what economists we're talking about there. So, anyways, that may be a little update, and don't take this as a pressure, but I'm always so excited to hear where you're at on the submittal of the paper.
Oh, it's already been submitted. We put it in on the weekend, so now we're waiting. I think it's basically. I mean, the timing was such that I haven't. I had to get back to working on my book for modeling with Minsky. So that's the companion book that's coming out for the new Economics Manifesto, which is coming out in October in the UK and Europe. So I downed that and picked up the modeling with Minsky, and haven't read. I've looked at the summary, but I haven't read in any detail the IPCC report. The thing is, in many ways, I've been reading the papers on which it's based for the last 2 or 3 years, and one of the weaknesses, of course, is the IPCC wants to get a consensus, and of course that ended up being the lowest common denominator of the threats everybody agrees to get published. The threats that may well be correct don't turn up, and one of those, which has been something that for a range of reasons has been what I've been looking at recently, is what could happen to we call it the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Overhauling Circulation. Also, I think it's called thermohaline circulation. So it's got both elements of temperature and salinity to it. And there are worrying signs turning up in the data that this may be flipping from its strong state, which is what we've known it for the 10,000 years humanity has been as a sort of a species with a civilization rather than just a species, to the weak state. And if that happens, then the energy transfer that causes across the planet, and it's a circulation which goes right from the south to the North Pole and back again. This is people think about the Gulf Stream, and they think of their vision, I suppose, is like a loop going from the Gulf of Mexico to Greenland and back down again. But in fact, the overall chain, AMOC is only a part of it, but it links the equator to both poles. And if it weakens in the northern region, the section we call the AMOC, or that scientists call the aim. I've always got to say I'm an observer of science, not a scientist myself. They believe that would dramatically, well, they know they would dramatically transform the energy situation of Europe, because the amount, as I said, I think it transfers about 24% of the energy absorbed by the sun that actually stays in the planet is circulated by that. Now, not at all it goes to Europe, of course. It warms the west coast, it warms the east coast of America, as well as warming Western Europe. But if it does break down, if it goes so from the strong state to the weak state, then from a large amount to a small amount of energy will be going transferred from that equatorial regions to Western Europe, and we could see a substantial fall in temperature in Europe caused by that breakdown. Now, the other side of that is that if you get that, then, I mean, and this is me being hypothetical, not knowing what scientists would say about it, but what you would then have is a larger temperature gradient between the equator and Europe. And since that gradient is mediated by water, the potential, I think, and I'd like to see science papers on this, would be for stronger storms, because the storms dissipate that energy as well. So it's the sort of thing which causes catastrophic change. If you've set yourself up for one particular climate and then you suddenly flip to another, where you've built your entire infrastructure is wrong. And if that happens suddenly, you have no time to readjust. So AMOC was something which, when other studies were done, and looking at, say, the study by Tim Lenton and colleagues in 2008, I think they gave about a century or 2 centuries. I'll look it up, actually. Their guess as to the timing is when AMOC would flip over was of the order of a century or more. So not something you need to worry about immediately. But now the data is saying, well, maybe it's going to happen faster than that. So that's actually had more of my attention than the IPCC report. Yeah,
I heard about that too. And so, recently in the news, we heard I think the collapse of, I think there was due to flooding in Germany, right?
Yeah,
But this wasn't a result of a tipping point. And so, let me see if I've got the terminology right. The collapse of that system that you're talking about is one of the tipping points, going from I guess a fast speed to a slow speed, and it's nothing that we can reinvigorate again. This was a naturally occurring phenomenon going at the speed that it's going, and if it goes into a slow sort of hibernating a speed, that's what we're left with. That's there's no increasing that.
Yeah, we can't turn it back on again. Just looking at the study that I think people should take a look at, because it's very accessible, and it's the very beginnings of us scientists attempting to say, well, what could cause a complete change in the nature of the climate? I mean, one thing that really pisses me off is the way that neoclassicals have abused the word climate, because they use climate as a comparative thing across the planet. So, of course, Hawaii has a different climate to Montana. But what is meant by climate scientists is the overall pattern of the planet itself. And if we flip from like one climate, and I use this as an example in one of my initial papers on it, one aspect of the climate is the fact we have 3 circulatory systems in each hemisphere, what they call the Hadley cell, which is between 0 and 30 degrees either side of the equator, and then the mid-latitude cell 30 to 60, and then the polar cell 60 to 90. And effectively, if you imagine a pot of water on a stove, you know how you get those rising and falling columns. Well, that's what they're like. There's 1, 2, 3 of them, and there you get there's a it's so complicated, like not a figure of 8, but a figure of 8 with 3 curves to it. That's the sort of circulation you can imagine that we have sitting in the atmosphere. And what that means is that each of those 3 peaks becomes a region where the temperature is relatively constant across that particular bubble, but which is like the rising column, for example. And then there's very different than one where it's a falling column and then rising on the other side. So you can actually sort of, if you live in the tropics or you live in the sub-equatorial, mid-latitudes, or you live in the polar regions, those are three distinctly different subsets of the current climate. But if you put extra energy into the atmosphere, and this has happened historically, of course, with changes of the natural cycle of the planet as well, that can break down, and there's only one. And now what that means is if it happens to be the middle one, the 30 to 60, which is the most equitable for living in, you build all your infrastructure there, which is what we've done. And suddenly, and it can be suddenly, then that you flip from 3 to 1, you've got to move, 30 or 40 degrees in either direction to be able to get some elements of that new climate, the rainfall, the temperature, and so on, that make life sustainable. And it may be the amount of area left is trivial. So that's what climate scientists mean by the climate flipping. And just back to that Tim Lenton paper, which is called tipping elements in the I was actually go back and check tipping elements in the Earth's climate system. They identified 9 subsystems which could all potentially flip this century, though they might take longer to occur. Now, of those 3, the Arctic summer sea ice, and I think already it should be obvious to most people that's going to disappear pretty soon. That they gave anywhere between 0.5 degree and 2 degrees Celsius, so anywhere between 1 and 4 degrees Fahrenheit would cause that to tip. And if once it starts to go irrevocably, like it gets to the point where we can't change it, they say it'll be a decade that it's all gone. Well, that might be happening this decade. But in terms of the next 2 they gave in terms of ranking likelihood and the temperature, a low temperature level to have it happen with Greenland and West Antarctic. And number 4, because they said the Greenland might go at 1 degree to 2, which is again in terms of Fahrenheit 2 to 4 degrees. Mm-hmm. And the West Antarctic ice sheet, they said 3 to 5. So you're talking 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit increase, which is quite large. Then they had the Atlantic thermohighland circulation, that the AMOC, which the AMOC that's another term for the AMOC. And they said +3 to +5 degrees. Now that's, and they said when it happened, it'll be 100 years to happen, it'll be gradual. Well, even though these models are far more realistic than what economists pump out, they're still modeling a universe we've never seen before. And it may be, their models may be inaccurate as to what the temperature levels are. And this may be based on what we know from historical paleontological data, when we're doing it at a far faster rate than paleontologically. So they said 3 to 5 degrees Celsius needed, and it would take 100 years. And again, for Fahrenheit thinkers, that's sort of 5 to 9 degrees Fahrenheit increase. We're nowhere near that. And 100 years will be gradual. The current data is saying, look, it might already be happening, and it could happen in a matter of a decade. Now, looking at the changes that are occurring right now. So that would just suddenly mean that Europe was no longer what we have come to regard Europe as. And it would become a lot colder, but potentially all subject and drier, but more volatile weather as well, because the amount of moisture stored by the air goes up with temperature. But also the part which is I'm most fascinated by, what's the potential for superstorms coming out of that temperature difference we'll now see building up in the ocean, because the temperature that builds up at the tropical levels where I now live, in the tropic, of course, and I think in the Atlantic tropic there, temperature will rise and it won't be dissipated by being sent up to Europe anymore. So what you'll get potentially is a huge temperature gradient. And that's the sort of thing which gives you storms.
Yeah.
And we're talking storms. So, the energy level involved in that gradient is gigantic. So our past history of what storms can be would be nothing compared to what the storms could be in that situation. Again, I'm just hypothesizing. I'm not a climate scientist. But that's the scariest thing I've seen. The IPCC report, in that sense, is summarizing what I've already read without looking at the extrapolations. It's the extrapolations that I'm most concerned by.
Yeah, the extrapolations, I think a good plus for the reports, or some of the takeaways that I've been able to glean, is the strong language, like unequivocal, as opposed to highly probable or this kind of thing in previous reports. So
Yeah.
when the science is certain about when they're certain about the science, then they're very clear in the language. And I think it's up to 195 countries that have bought into this, with leading climate scientists. So from that standpoint, I'm very, I don't know, I felt proud. I'm proud in the fact that we've got 195 countries that are saying that, we stand behind what our scientists are saying. Now, what does that mean?
I think the trouble is that I think is they might be standing behind, but they're also standing in front of. Because a lot of what they're doing is effectively rejecting, agreeing with the scientists are saying, but rejecting the consequences of it. And the reason here, I can speak another report written in 2021 by the American government. The Biden administration has revitalized what they call the intergovernmental, not the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but an intra-governmental committee in America. And the three models that they're using there to assess what's happening with climate change are FUND, DICE, and I think it's called, not HOPE, but three models, all by neoclassical economists. And that's what they're using to say what are the impacts of climate change. Well, that's trivializing, as I know far too well, trivializing the dangers we face, and coming out and saying, let's put a bit of a price on carbon and it'll all be hunky-dory.
Wow, okay, so I didn't realize that America was actually using DICE. I would imagine that most of these countries, out of the 195, that'd be interesting data to see how many of the 195 countries are actually using DICE into their projections.
Oh, a vast majority of them would be. The document I'm talking about, published in February 2021, the technical support document, social cost of carbon, methane and nitrous oxide, interim estimates under Executive Order 13990. It's that's the one that Biden has signed. It's the interagency working group on social cost of greenhouse gases by the United States government. And when you look at what they've done, they're like FUND, it's HOPE, it's DICE and FUND that they're using primarily to say what the impacts are and what the price level should be of carbon, to mean that we can let the market control global warming.
Well, I'm not familiar with, was FUND another offshoot of Nordhaus?
No, it's written by my good mate. FUND is written by my good friend Richard Toll.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you realise there's sarcasm galore on that line. It's DICE, Page, and FUND. Those are the three, and that's this is looking on the report here. That's on page 10 of this report. They talk about how they finalise the social cost of carbon values for use in regulatory analyses, and so three of these values are based on the average cost of carbon from three widely cited integrated assessment models in the peer-reviewed literature: DICE, Page, and FUND. DICE is, and they say DICE is William Nordhaus. Page is developed by Chris Hope, not a bad person from my interactions with him. And FUND is developed by Richard Toll. So in that sense, all the stuff that the climate scientists do, and I can't say this is happening. The bureaucrats think that the economists have done their job properly. Well, that's mistake number one. Okay. And what they think, therefore, as a result of that, is that the economists have taken the projection of things like the scientists write the IPCC report, looked at the economic impacts of that over time, and then applied discount rates back, and then that's how they resume. So if that were true, then it wouldn't be such a mistake to use what the economists say. Of course, as I know, the economists made up their own damn stupid numbers, and that's what goes into those calibrating the models. And so, therefore, what the scientists are reading, the first report comes out from the IPCC, is saying we should draw a line in the sand at 1 and certainly 2 degrees Celsius. And here's, they're taking DICE, which I know far too well, saying 4 degrees is optimal. And if we don't do anything, we might lose, by 2100, the economy might be 8% smaller than it would otherwise be, and we'd be 6 degrees warmer. On the other side of the fence, there be dragons. That's the side of the map the scientists saying, there be dragons, don't go there. That's where they're saying it's going to be a nice place to put up a human settlement.
Yeah. Like you said, it might be 8% of GDP left, not 8% GDP loss.
Exactly. Yeah. There'd be some human activity somewhere on the planet at that level. I think it might be 0.8 rather than 8, probably out by an order of magnitude, but that's not bad compared to economists.
Oh, man. And how the economists can get it so wrong. And we're talking about the world leading economists are getting it so wrong that it's like there's almost some negligence there. I would assume.
To be honest, no, it is negligence. I mean, the thing which if you look at my greatest ambition now before I die, is no longer writing my magnum opus, because in one sense getting my manifesto out is like my mini opus, and what I'm doing as a support book covers most of the things I'd like people to use in economics in future, and that's my contribution to there. I want to be the expert witness in their trial for negligence.
Okay.
Because in terms of ecocide, because if you're negligent and nobody worries about what you do, then that's fine. Okay, if a bunch of performance artists were arguing that we can survive happily in 6 to 8 degrees, and you might see them at an off-Broadway show down at Soho. Who cares? Okay? If this stuff is being used by the United States government to say what its policy response is going to be, and you have so negligently put together the data, you are going to be responsible for this crisis being existential. And in that situation, I don't care that there isn't a Hippocratic oath for economists. We're going to impose one retrospectively, and you're going to be sued for negligence.
But I mean, not only that, Steve, I think you've elevated it to a point with your paper where you're actually showing a proof, right? And now that adds to the witness and the expert witness testimony, right?
Yeah,
That's the idea.
I can talk a bit about the content of the paper, because again, as I said, I haven't had a chance to be given everything else I'm doing. I haven't had a chance to read the IPCC summary. And I probably won't get much longer. Let's talk about that in detail next week. But I can talk about the contents of our paper, which we've just submitted, and what's been added to that in terms of compared to what I wrote in the globalizations paper. We start with how Nordhaus has misrepresented the work by Lenton, and Lenton is my leading co-author is Tim Lenton. Okay, so like when I wrote the original paper for globalizations, I actually emailed Tim and said, "Is there any basis for Nordhaus's interpretation of your results that I might have missed?" And he said, "No, there's none, and you got it precisely right." Well, then when I wrote this one, and it was invited by the journal itself, I wanted to go beyond just having Tim say so that I was correct in interpreting him and Nordhaus was wrong. I wanted Tim's name on a paper saying that, and that's what we've got. So the opening section of the paper is titled "Misrepresenting the Scientific Literature," and we then go through, and I'll give my favourite comparison. This was partially in the globalizations paper, but Tim's research brought together. It was a survey of about over 100 climate scientists. They got, I think, close to 100 responses from over 100 people they sent it to, asking them to stick within their area of expertise. Don't go outside what you know as a scientist, but give us an idea of what temperature level is feasible to cause a state transition in the system you're looking at from the state which humanity has evolved, human society has evolved in, something which would be radically different. It could affect the climate of the whole planet. And so they came up with those nine systems, 8 of which could be just by temperature alone. And then they did their ranking. And I first became aware of the paper from William Nordhaus, because, like I mentioned, in his manual for DICE, he says that This is a quote from the DICE manual. The current version, meaning the current version of his model, assumes that damages are a quadratic function of temperature change and does not include sharp thresholds or tipping points. But this is consistent with a survey by Lenton et al. 2008. Now, I didn't even know I hadn't read any of Tim's work at the time. This is I think I saw that 2 or 3 years ago. So I thought,
let me ask you, that statement alone is a direct misrepresentation of his work then.
Oh, totally. Yeah. So I went looking. First of all, I mean, this is the sloppiness that I've found in dealing with Nordhaus's work. When you read something like that as an academic, the first thing you go is look in the bibliography. I did. There was no paper by Lenton in the bibliography. So to find this paper, I had to search, Google or in the academic database of Lenton 2008, and then I located this paper, and that was the only paper that, well, the other papers Tim wrote that, but the one which was a survey was this particular paper. So that's how I located the paper, and then I read the paper. And I read the whole paper and I read it quite closely, but the conclusion is the part that stood out the most because, again, I'll repeat Nordhaus's summary. It says, damages are a quadratic function of temperature change and does not include sharp thresholds or tipping elements, but this is consistent with the survey by Lenton. Well, the very first sentence in the conclusion to Lenton's paper is, and I quote, society may be lulled into a false sense of security by smooth projections of global change. That's exactly what Nordhaus has done and uses Lenton to justify doing what Lenton said, don't do it. It's like I said, kids say, I'm putting my hand in the fire, but mother said that's fine.
Yeah.
Mother basically said, don't put your hand in the fire. Mum said it's all right. It really is that stupid. And this is what gets my groin so much about this stuff. Quite seriously, if I had a student submit a paper that summarised this, read and summarise this paper, and if Nordhaus wrote that, I'd sack him. I'd kick him out of the course. I wouldn't fail it. I wouldn't just fail him. I'd throw him out of the course.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I keep on thinking of one particular student I had to behave that way back when I was at the University of Western Sydney. I gave a seminar on the history of economic thought there. And he was asked to give a paper on post-Keynesian economics. And he started explaining Samuelson's textbook because that's post-Keynesian. I was saying, excuse me, that's not post-Keynesian. Yes, it is. He wrote it after Keynes. Post-Keynes does not mean written at a later date than Keynes. Okay? It's an entirely different way of thinking. Oh, no, it's all post. I said, look, I finally said, look, mate, get off the stage.
Yeah.
Get off the stage. Shut up. Okay? And got him out of the way. And he was indignant, angry, blah, blah, blah. And I must admit that one way I stuffed him up later. I made one mistake with respect to this particular student. But fundamentally, he just didn't have a fucking clue. And yet he was adamant he was right. And this is so what I've done within this paper, we compare 4 key statements by Lenton versus Nordhaus. So that one about, I've already given the first one, the current version, a quadratic function versus a false sense of security. And then this is in another book. And this one, by the way, I've got my own personal troll, a little twerp down in New Zealand called Jim Rose. I call him Jimmy just to annoy him, not that I know that it does. But he said, Keane obviously hasn't read Casino, the Climate Casino, because there Nordhaus discusses tipping points. Well, I thought, well, Jim says I should read it. I better take a look. And chapter 5 is on tipping points. And here is where he discusses that in the Climate Casino. There have been a few systematic surveys of tipping points in Earth systems. A particularly interesting one by Lenton and colleagues examined the important tipping elements and assessed their timing. I've used a few words out there. The most important tipping elements, in their view, have a threshold temperature tipping value of 3 degrees Celsius or higher, or have a time scale of at least 300 years. Their review finds no critical tipping elements with a time horizon of less than 300 years until global temperatures have increased by at least 3 degrees Celsius, 5 degrees Fahrenheit. And I thought, this kid that I threw off the stage back in the University of Western Sydney, it's like giving him a Nobel Prize. instead.
Okay, this is so comical. So there's a couple things. Jimmy, as you like to call him, I can almost. Are you going to give him some credit, like a part-time research assistant? Because look at the work he's doing for you.
Well, that's actually what I thanked him. But this, look, whatever Jimmy says is black, I know is white. So it's a very useful way to cut to the chase. So I want to find something that's going to be outrageously stupid. Jimmy's going to be then saying how wonderful it is. So Jimmy Rose has done me a few favors.
Yeah. Okay. And then the other one is about the Nobel Prize. You say, well, it could go to your student that you helped walk off the stage. The other one, and I hope I'm not jinxing this in any particular way, but we both got scientific minds, so the jinxing factor is really not, Murphy's Law doesn't really come into this equation. So it's like the Nordhaus Nobel Prize is, I can see it being stripped and then reassigned. No,
it can't. Unfortunately, it can't. I've already checked this. In fact, a group of students did do a demonstration outside the 2019 awards, calling for it to be removed. But in fact, it's irrevocable. And intriguingly, one part of that, which is quite a fascinating sideline, the recipient for the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in something like 2020, he got it for the work that he did in establishing nitrogenous fertilizers. So he effectively gave us the chemistry for artificial fertilizer. Now, that in itself is a potential major contributor to human extinction, because it went from where we might be able to support 2 billion people in agriculture to 10 billion, but that's dependent upon using oil as the source of the fertilizer. Now, if we then find, well, we simply can't do it anymore, we've got to stop that, then we go from 10 billion carrying capacity down to 2, which is part of the catastrophe we could face in the future. Anyway, he got the Nobel Prize. But the main thing he was worried about was getting the Nobel Prize. He'd be exposed for the work he did in developing mustard gas for the Germans in World War I. And he, in fact, supervised the application. The first time it was used in a battle, he supervised it. Now, he can't have his Nobel Prize revoked, so I'm afraid Nordhaus is going to hang on to his till his grave.
Wow, that's I was going to say that's a shame, but it's not. I mean, it sounds awkward to say that, but yeah. Well, I can still root that the committee might actually look at you, but what's the value of it, and Steve, if they hand them out that way?
Well, I mean, the very first recipient, I believe, was Hayek, and Hayek said that economics is not a field which should have a Nobel Prize.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'd be saying, I agree with Hayek, and let's shut the damn thing down. I'll take the money, thanks very much, and pay for some of the research I should have been funded to do in the last 50 years. But this is a farce, and this should be the fact you've given it to me when my whole purpose in life is to exterminate neoclassical economics. I have an idea. Okay,
So here's the idea. You got the prize. They're handing it to you, and you say, under one condition, we're shutting it down. And then you're the last recipient of it. There's your magnum opus, Steve. Yeah,
I'm watching pigs fly outside the window here, by the way. So I'm not holding any breath on that one. But that's if this is my Walter Mitty. If I manage to get on that stage in Stockholm, then my speech would be about how this should be the final Nobel Prize. Thanks for the money.
Yeah.
He bookended either end by economists who argued it shouldn't exist. The last 50 years has proven that. Let's shut the damn thing down.
Yeah, economics only, not the.
Oh yeah, well, that's the only non-Nobel Prize that gets a Nobel Prize. I mean, the other thing which people aren't particularly aware of, the actual title of the Nobel Prize in economics is the Sveriges Riksbank Bank Award in economics in honor of Alfred Nobel. Were you aware of that?
No.
Okay. It's an invention of the Central Bank of Sweden in 1969. It was not part of Nobel's. You don't know this bit. Okay.
Oh, I do know. I actually know that it was kind of like an add-on sort of thing, right?
It wasn't an add-on. It was a graft from a foreign species. I don't know. I think about 80 years after. I mean, the story, and I don't know this as well as I should, but the reason that Nobel set up the prize was, I believe, that he was the inventor of dynamite, of course. and he had a brother. And I think he was in Russia at the time. This is back in the 1800s, long before Russia was Soviet, went back when it was feudal. And his brother died, and the newspapers made the mistake of thinking he died. So they published his obituaries. And like, anybody famous, substantially famous, has their obituary written before they die, so that it's just a job of editing it when they actually do die to publish the thing rapidly. And they said how he's responsible for more deaths in human history and was a scourge on humanity, et cetera, because of the creation of dynamite. So his decision was, well, I don't want that to be my legacy. How can I reverse it? So he created these prizes in favor of peace, the Nobel Prize for Peace, literature, physics, chemistry, and I think medicine. I think there are the 5 prizes, but not economics, okay? But then in 1969, in the middle of a political battle over the nature of economic policy in Sweden, because Sweden gave us the idea of social democracy, so you had a progressive government pushing together sort of Keynes on steroids type economic policies, where the central bank was still a bastion of neoclassical thinking. So they created the prize as a way of promoting their side of that debate in Sweden, and then put it to the Nobel Prize overarching committee, and said, we're going to fund the prize, which at that stage I think was 1.4 million American dollars. We'll fund it. Okay, so it's not coming out of Alfred Nobel's bequest, and it's funded by the central bank, and therefore the selection process is set up by the bank itself rather than by the original system for the genuine Nobel Prizes. So it's always been a political creature, and they normally give it to neoclassical economists. Occasionally they'll give it to somebody outside that when they get under a track. So Gunnar Myrdal, I think, got one of the prizes, and you get a few other non-orthodox people, generally speaking. But it's there to promote economics as if it's a science. And it's been extremely successful, and it's been extremely wrong at the same time. So I would do, I'd like to bookend it and say, chuck the damn thing out.
I meant to ask you several episodes ago about biological economics. I believe it's a smaller, less obscure sort of division of economics. Do you run into that at all?
You mean biophysical?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm part of the Biophysical Economics Institute. So I think I might be getting my wife's dropping a thing here for me. Thanks, honey. Oh, whoa. I'm getting a cake. All right. I'm physically part of the planet here, so you see that? There we go. Okay.
Nice cake.
Thai pastries, the local rival of French pastries, I must say.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so pardon me. Where was I? Forgotten.
The biophysical economics, and you're a part of an organization, and so you weigh in from an advisory standpoint, I'm guessing, or you sit on a board?
It's called the Biophysical Economics Institute. It's largely established on the work of Charlie Hall, Charlie Hall was the guy who he's a physicist working on issues of economics and energy. And he's the one who termed the concept of energy return on energy invested. Civilization, and this comes back to the whole fact that we can only have an industrial society if we are using energy to create structures that don't exist in nature, that enable us to turn more of the available energy on the planet into, what we would call useful work from our point of view, our perspective as a species. And so you only do that if the amount of energy you put into getting the energy is less than the amount of energy you get back.
Yeah.
Pardon me with the pastry in my mouth here. So if you have an energy return, energy invested of 1, you might as well just be scavenging on the plane. There's no point in putting in the energy in if you want to get in what you put back. You must get a multiple. And when you look at where industrialization began, we were using, if you chop down a tree, the energy you put into chopping down a tree, which is something, you got to pay a human enough, give them enough food that they've got the energy to chop the tree down. And they've got to be earning a sustainable income to continue doing it. And then you burn that tree. you must get more energy back out of the burning of the tree than you had to pay the woodsman to chop the tree down. Yeah. But of course, the amount of energy in the tree might be 5 or 10 times the energy the worker puts in. You lose half of that in taking it from the forest, moving it to a city, using it to fire coals, and then do your metallurgy and so on. It's only a tiny substrate of society which can actually benefit from that. So most of us are therefore living, because of agriculture, are living above the background energy level of all the other species on the planet.
Yeah.
But not a long way past. And then this tiny part of energy is some metal products, but not a lot. And that covers from 3000 BC to 1800, pretty much, or maybe 1750. But it was from the use of initially peat, then coal, and then finally the James Watt steam engine, which is a very efficient way of getting the energy out of coal. That's what set off the revolution. I mean, the real kick was oil. Which we only started discovering in the 1800s, which is so energy dense, and where we first found it was so easy to locate that you got it 100 to 1. And with that level of energy, then bang, that's where industrial civilization came from. And of course, the side effect of that is pumping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
Yeah, and I've heard that the cost, and I guess it fluctuates based off of the cost of a barrel of oil. And I can't remember whether it was at a $30 barrel of oil. I think somebody's done the calculation that it actually costs more to actually produce a barrel of oil and refine it and get it through the the pipelines and the whole production of it than it actually does to than the actual value of the oil itself, right? So this
it varies from field to field. I mean, if you go back, I mean, you're old enough to have seen the Beverly Hillbillies, I imagine.
Oh yeah, the Gushers.
Okay, we know Jed goes out and fires a shotgun at a rabbit, and Texas tea comes out of the ground.
Yeah.
Okay. There was actually in Philadelphia that fundamentally happened, but you could drill down 20. I don't know how far it was. A drill of the order of 100 feet down, and you hit a reservoir, and because it's under pressure, you didn't need to pump it out. It just blasted out. Okay. So that was the way oil first came about. And then the Texas oil fields were discovered and so on. And they were so close to the ground under such pressure that once you dug the hole, the main thing to do was catch the stuff. That was the main, and control how fast it came out of the ground. That was the pressure, the manufacturing issue. And that was enormous reservoirs. Now, with the biggest field of oil was in Saudi Arabia, and I believe that the cost of production of that oil is below $10 a barrel, maybe 10 or 12. So that's the absolute bottom line. That field will still be worth exploiting in terms of the dollars return for dollars invested, up to down to a price of about 12, and that's why the Saudis are so important in terms of their capacity to swing the global oil market. But of course, when we start drilling off the coast of Mexico, in the Gulf of Mexico, to find oil, and you've got this enormous industrial structure, which is so big that Elon Musk is now buying leftover mining rigs as a potential base for launching the world's biggest rocket into space. And those things were drilling down kilometers into the soil, into the crust, to find reservoirs that far down. The energy you're putting in versus the energy you put out does have it's the main thing that Charlie focuses on is the energy return and energy invested. That is distorted by the price system, so it's quite possible you can still come out ahead. The form of energy in oil can be more valuable than the forms of energy you use to exploit it in a dollar sense for a while. But those don't turn a profit below $30, $40 a barrel. And also the classic there being shale oil. I think that was originally up to the $80 or $90 a barrel. Now it's down to about 40 or 50 apparently with technological advances.
Shale oil, and then there's also the Alberta tar sands, and being able to, that's a very expensive oil to refine as well.
Yeah, so at some point those ones won't be worth getting out of the ground. As somebody said, the Stone Age didn't stop for a shortage of stones, and the Oil Age won't stop for a shortage of oil. It's been too expensive to get it out in terms of energy. So what we're focusing on is the actual basis of civilization is energy return and energy invested large enough to enable you to support a superstructure which a large number of people themselves benefit from. And the normal calculations I've seen say you need a return of at least 5 to 1, if not, and so it may be 7 to 1, before you can support an advanced civilization of any description. And 20 to 30 is like a sweet spot. So this is a large part of the analysis of biophysical economics.
Are we seeing this with a portfolio of renewables, as far as you can tell?
Yeah, well, there's what's called the EROI cliff, energy return and energy invested cliff. So if you go right up to oil, you've got 100 to 1, back in the early days, 100, 120 to 1. But it's slowly going in the other direction because as we exploit the readily available oil and burn it, it ends up in there's carbon dioxide and other wastes in the atmosphere. And we have to get deeper and deeper to get the oil, then the energy return, energy invested starts to get towards this cliff of where it's no longer sustainable to do it. Whereas solar and wind are coming from the other direction. Mm. And the question mark for a lot of people is, will it get to the point where the energy return and energy invested is worthwhile? Now, I've got, like I said, I've a lot of engineers are my supporters on Patreon, and some of them are fans of solar, saying, well, this energy return, energy invested is substantial. But others say, if you look at the overall structure you need to make things like solar work, it isn't just like how many watts a solar panel can absorb. It's midday on the equator. It's even on the equator for 12 hours of a day, there's zero sunshine, so you can't use it. Then you've got to have storage. Then you might need extra capacity to be able to get, because you've got to store energy, you've got to have more than the amount of receptors you need for the use while the receptor's in the sunshine. And then you've got cloudy days and et cetera, all these factors. So putting all that together and saying, can we replace the industrial infrastructure and sustain the energy needs of the structure we have now? And there's huge areas of disagreement between them, but some say categorically not. So if you want to have the industrial society we have at the moment, you have to be using nuclear. Others are making the opposing point and pointing out there's huge energy losses. Again, when you look at energy return, energy invested, it doesn't matter what that is at the oil well. You need to know what it is on the tarmac. Well, the same thing applies to electricity. If you generate that with high energy return, energy invested in some sustainable plant 1,000 kilometers away, to get that through the wires, you will lose 50% of it. Yeah. And then you have further losses all the way down the system. So all these things matter in working out whether you can actually sustain the level of society we have, given the losses that exist in the overall chain of going from where we find the energy to where we apply the energy. Pardon me, continue to eat here, but if I don't,
no, go ahead. And I was going to say, so take a few bites, and I'll kind of frame this, and I'll bring it into our next point here. Is that it's a very complex, how to roll out renewables. Number one, the right mix of renewables based off of location. The nuclear, non-nuclear question. I know Greenpeace is very much against that. It's a complex. There's
actually part of Greenpeace that is pro-nuclear.
It's what? Sorry.
There is not Greenpeace itself, but there's part of the Greens movements which are pro-nuclear.
Oh no, Greenpeace. Greenpeace. I was looking at them the other day, and they're actually against nuclear.
Greenpeace itself. Yeah.
I'm more cautious on it actually after reading their rationale. It more has to do with our. Well, we won't get into that. That could be a whole other episode. How I'd like to kind of finish this is that you kind of hit a trigger for me about magnum opus, and once you I'll let you kind of stew around with it with a sip of your tea and some of your lunch there. But what does your magnum opus look like if you had the time, if you were off the witness stand, so to speak, if the trajectory of that, gave you enough mental space that you could actually put something together that you could legacy leave as a magnum opus. How would you describe that?
I call it Principles of Political Economy and Ecology. That's my working title, because books called Principles or Foundations have often been the books that change the direction of economics. So Ricardo had Principles of Political Economy and Taxation. Samuelson had Foundations of Economic Analysis. Okay? And they are epoch-changing books in how we think about the economy. So my working title is Principles. Maybe I could use Foundation just to annoy Paul Samuelson, his ghost, but Foundations of Economic Analysis and Ecology. And the opening there you've got to always situate yourself in the literature. So I began in effect of a historian of economic thought because my first published works were on Marx and how Marx got his own philosophy wrong to preserve the labour theory of value when he should have abolished it. And I actually spoke about that in my podcast with Phil Dobbie a couple of weeks ago. So I would be starting off saying, well, where should economics have actually begun? We're looking at the overall history of economic thought. And most books begin by saying what a wonderful economist Adam Smith was. Well, I'm saying Adam Smith's the one who's stuffed up. Okay? Because if you try to draw a line through economists from before Smith to today, then the neoclassicals really started Smith and say everything before him was crazy. And then Smith, when we descend from Smith, that's their argument. Well, when you look at it, Smith was what's called a classical theory of value. He didn't believe in scarcity as the foundation of value. What he saw was reproducibility was the foundation of value. And to increase reproducibility, you had to increase the division of labour. That was his position. So he began by saying labour, effectively, is the source of value. Not in so many words, but that was the orientation. Well, that led to Marx, and Marx then used that as an argument against capitalism to say capitalism should be overthrown. And then you had the neoclassicals coming in saying it's not just labour, it's labour and capital that contribute. Okay. Well, we get to now, and looking back from my point of view, they've both left energy out of the equation. Okay. Energy and exploitation of energy is the real basis of value. And if you look at that, the people who put that argument forward were the physiocrats who predate Smith. And Smith actually met the leading physiocrat, Francois Quenet, spent time in France with them. But if you look at the two countries at the time, France was rural, Scotland was industrial. And the French said all value comes from land. And Smith said the value comes from labour. Yeah. He threw us off the track. We should go back and start with the physiocrats. So that's the opening of the book. And then
wow. What a summary to the top of the hour. That's very exciting. I really hope you get to that point in your journey for humanity's sake. So wow, that's very impressive, Steve. As usual, if there's anything else you want to add to the top of the show, that's it. And that's another
so let's say next week, I promise to spend a bit of time reading the summary, at least of the IPCC, so I can get some feedback there.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Bye, mate.
Bye.